Stand up now or surrender our founder's vision, Representative Governor. Here we're going to take a deep dive with the dark journalist. He is going to help us understand the powers we the people face in order to defeat them. We have a conundrum because we have some serious powers that we're working against. And we're going to break this into segments, and we want you to listen closely to what he has to say. This historic knowledge, and he's right on. It's all verified facts.
The White House is still refusing to answer any questions about the whistleblower who says Joe Biden sold out America to foreign nationals. Watch this.
I'm going to have to refer you to the Justice Department on that. I have nothing for you on that today.
No, do you know what this is, what country this pertains to, or what policy decision?
I have nothing for you, sir. I'm going to have to refer you to the Justice Department.
House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer is sending a subpoena to FBI Director Christopher Wray, demanding that he testify on the allegations that the Bureau possesses an unclassified internal document which proves then Vice President Joe Biden leveraged U.S. policy for personal gain. Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley raising the possibility that the White House may have to block House investigators from obtaining the document. Watch this.
It'll be successful unless the White House classifies this document. And they better not, because I know it's a non-classified document, but they could keep me from getting it by classifying it.
Now, one of the things that happened there in Kennedy's presidency, as I mentioned, was that a lot of the advice he was getting about the CIA was from the man who created it, and that was Harry Truman. So Truman is saying to him, listen, don't listen to these guys. You know, they'll tell you one thing and do another. And really what you need to be doing is developing a whole new approach with them. Now, I want to point out something that Professor Scott taught me, and it's not something that's widely known or brought up around the Central Intelligence Agency, but the CIA was created originally after they got rid of the OSS during the war, the Office of Strategic Services, which was an intel branch. And so they created the Central Intelligence Group, but then they were like, well, let's have an agency really develop the whole thing. And Truman was absolutely against it at every turn. He said, it's an American Gestapo, no way. But he's talked into it. And he says, well, you're going to give the intelligence directly to the president. Now, there's a group in there that is around at the same time, and they're called the Office of Policy Coordination, OPC. Frank Wisner, all these guys who have really done the wild and crazy things during the war, and they go into this pose where they start to sabotage elections overseas. You know, we have a lot at stake, in the Italian elections, the communists can't take over and all this stuff. So they think that they have a blank check to do anything that they want. And this OPC becomes so radical and starts doing all these covert operations that Truman calls in the Central Intelligence Agency and says, you got to stop these people because they're doing things that are completely outside of their purview, and I haven't sanctioned any of it. Get them under your umbrella, get them under control. What happens is that branch of the OPC inside of the intelligence community, instead of being taken under control by the Central Intelligence Agency, they take over. So this is the nature of the problem and why it becomes an extra-constitutional agency. They're already thinking in this lawless fashion. The other thing that needs to be understood is that even though it's set up initially under the idea of some kind of military protocol and feeding intelligence back to the president, what happens is it's set up in a New York law firm that deals with international finance, Sullivan and Cromwell. So, and Dulles is the one who really is crucial to setting it up and will be its director from 53 to 61 until Kennedy fires him. This is the pipeline of international finance directly through, high finance, Wall Street, New York. And so that becomes a weird piece of all of this military intelligence gathering. Suddenly it has a purpose which crisscrosses with the Wall Street interests and the international finance around this law firm. So that was also another big miss there. And what happens is through that power of the government, and one of the things that happens in the background there is part of the CIA ledger in the background is that, they're given this mandate that no matter what they do, they can't be prosecuted. This is also completely extra-constitutional. It was never envisioned by the Founding Fathers, and it was only thought of as a way to deal with extraordinary circumstances.
Say a lot there. So let's see if we're going to unwind that a little bit for you in case there was just too much to consume in that short piece. Truman created the CIA. It came from the OSS in World War II. Truman opposed American Gestapo. That was what Truman called it. There was another branch called OPC. They were sabotaging foreign elections at that time. Now remember, they didn't even have the technology like they have today to sabotage elections. They were out of control. They ended up taking over the original concept of the CIA. And it turns out they're under the influence of an international law firm involved in finance. So we have finance and government working together. We have this question now. Who does the CIA represent? But before we hear more from DJ, let's go a little deeper.
What do they believe? A couple quotations here. Guy Sorman in City Journal. In what sense is the Communist Party of China still communist? It represents a Marxist liturgy that everyone recites and in which no one believes, close quote. Stephen Kotkin, seated right there on this program, quote, we all thought they were cynics, that they just mouthed communist ideology, but some of them believe it. Not only do some of them believe it, but communism is inherent in the system. Okay, Peter Thiel in his book 0 to 1. We're talking about a book that's now a decade old, so I don't even know whether Peter would restate this today. But here's what he said in 0 to 1. The Chinese have been straightforwardly copying everything that has worked in the developed world. 19th century railroads, 20th century air conditioning, and even entire cities. They might skip a few steps along the way, going straight to wireless without installing landlines, for instance, but they're copying all the same. Okay, this is an important point, because there is an argument that what we have, they outnumber us. You've just explained that by at least one measure, their economy is already bigger than ours. They outnumber us. If they choose to do so, they can outspend us on defense. Here's what we have. Democratic capitalism, which means the ability to innovate. We can stay a step ahead of them. That's the strategic fallback that we have. Emily Weinstein of the Brookings Institution, discussions surrounding China as a strategic competitor have been shaped by the notion that only democracy can promote innovation. Every day, China is disproving this line of thinking. Close quote.
There are people who find the Chinese Communist Party system attractive. Many of them are former Marxists or current Marxists. Not all of them are. I mean, read Martin Jakes' book, When China Rules the World, or read Daniel Bell's recent writing on the Chinese system, which he openly admires. So let's not assume that there are no people attracted by the Chinese model.
So here's George Kennan. You mentioned George Kennan a moment ago. George Kennan writing in 1953. We're not talking about the long telegram in 46. This is 1953. The Cold War is now underway. Korea's already happened. George Kennan, the thoughtful observer will find no cause for complaint in the Kremlin's challenge to American society. He will rather experience, nobody writes like this anymore. He will rather experience a certain gratitude to Providence, which, by providing the American people with this implacable challenge, has made their entire security as a nation dependent on their pulling themselves together and accepting the responsibilities of moral and political leadership that history plainly intended them to bear. Close quote. Do it again. One more quotation, this time from investor Ray Dalio, who has billions of dollars at stake in China. And one tends to listen to a man who has something at stake. Ray Dalio, quote, "The United States is having financial problems, it is having internal conflicts, and it is facing outside challenges. The Chinese are earning more than they're spending. They have domestic order, and they've had rapid improvement in education, productivity, trade. I can't say whether democracy is better than autocracy." Rather breathtaking admission right there. I can't say whether democracy is better than autocracy, but China's not like the United States, which is at risk of a type of civil war. Close quote.
So let's go back to what DJ said about the CIA for a moment. The CIA is above the law. It cannot be prosecuted. That's unconstitutional. Now, in this clip, the Hoover Institute, talking about when China rules the world. Marxists and Leninists. Where does that take us? Considering now, when you look at Delio, he's heavily invested in China. And what did DJ tell us about the CIA and being involved with international investment banks? So has our Constitution been overridden by international globalists? Why is Joe Biden being paid off by communist China? Is China intention to take over the global international banking system through BRIC? Which is why we showed you that in our first segment. A lot of questions here. There's a lot to consume. So who are we the people up against to protect our freedoms? If you don't think any of this is serious, let's go back and let's listen to what happened in the 60s and a letter from Truman. This should catch your attention.
So he knows what's gone on here, and he knows the people that he's been dealing with. So he writes, a month to the day of the assassination, an op-ed in the Washington Post, Harry S. Truman, limit CIA role to intelligence. This is such a crucial document, and it's often overlooked by historians, but it's on the record. And by the second version of the Post for that day, because they used to put out 2 newspapers a day, it's taken out at the CIA request. The night that Truman writes this whole op-ed, Alan Dulles, the fired CIA director, who's about to become the director of the Warren Commission, goes to visit him in Missouri. And he says, you have to retract this. You have to literally write a retraction. You can't, expose our forces to this danger. And by the way, you're taking a lot on yourself by doing this. And Truman, according to his own aides, responds and says, you can't threaten me, I'm old. And Dulles can't believe it. So what he does is he goes back and he gives an interview saying that the faculties, good old Harry has Alzheimer's, and so don't believe anything that he says. That's the way that they dealt with it. But I want to read you a few things from his op-ed that I think give us some clear idea of what the Kennedys were up against. And unfortunately, the bloated version of what they were up against then is the same thing we're facing off against for the 2024 election. Quote, I think it's become necessary to take another look at the purpose and operation of our Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. At least I'd like to submit here the original reason why I thought it necessary to organize the agency during my administration, what I expected to do, and how it was to operate as an arm of the president. I think it's fairly obvious that by and large, a president's performance in office is as effective as the information he has and the information he gets. Every president has available to him all the information gathered by many intelligence agencies already in existence, the Department of State, and he goes on. Their collective information reached the president all too frequently in conflicting conclusions. At times, intelligence reports tended to be slanted to conform to established positions of a given department. This becomes confusing, and what's worse, such intelligence is of little use to a president in reaching the right decisions. Therefore, I decided to set up a special organization charged with the collection of all intelligence reports from every available source, and to have those reports reach me as president without a department treatment. I wanted and needed the information in its natural, raw state and in as comprehensive a volume as it was practical for me to make full use of it. But the most important thing about this move was to guard against the chance of intelligence being tied or used to influence or to lead the president into unwise decisions. And I thought it was necessary that the president do his own thinking and evaluating. Since the responsibility for decision-making was his, then he had to be sure that no information was kept from him for whatever reason, at the discretion of any one department or agency. Those who want to shield a president from bad news or misjudgments or spare him from being upset. For some time, I've been disturbed by the way the CIA has been diverted from its original assignment. It has become an operational and at times a policy-making arm of the government. It's completely unconstitutional. This has led to trouble and may have compounded our difficulties in several explosive areas. I never had any thought when I set up the CIA that it would be injected into peacetime cloak and dagger operations. Some of the complications and embarrassment I think we've experienced are in part attributable to the fact that this quiet intelligence arm of the president has been so removed from its intended role that it's being intercepted and interpreted as a symbol of sinister and mysterious foreign intrigue, a subject for Cold War enemy propaganda. With all the nonsense put out by communist propaganda about Yankee imperialism, in their name-calling assault on the West, the last thing we needed was for the CIA to be seized upon as something akin to subverting influence in the affairs of other people. I well knew the first temporary director of the CIA, Admiral Sowers, and later permanent directors, Hoyt Vandenberg, who, by the way, managed the UFO file. But there are some searching questions that need to be answered. I therefore would like to see the CIA be restored to its original assignment, the intelligence arm of the president, that whatever else it can properly perform in that special field, and that its operational duties be terminated or properly used elsewhere. We have grown up as a nation respected for our free institutions and for our ability to maintain a free and open society. There is something about the way the CIA has been functioning that is casting a shadow over our historic position, and I feel that we need to correct it now. Now, it's basically mend it or end it. And he's saying something weird going on about how this thing is functioning and is totally different from what I set up. So whatever it is now, it's a Frankenstein. This is Truman's attitude by the time the Kennedy assassination happens, and he releases the op-ed, as I said, a month to the day.
Did you catch that? Was that letter eye-opening? That's how it can relate to today. Truman writes a letter knowing who was behind Kennedy's assassination. The CIA has Truman's op-ed letter removed from the media. The former president, Truman, and creator of the CIA, is threatened by the CIA. What he's reading you is an actual document from the letter. He read it to you word by word. So, what about whistleblowers today? Did you hear how, I think it was Comer said it, that they fear for their lives? So, Truman warned JFK, and JFK intended to do something about it. Truman regrets what happened to the CIA. It went rogue. We're talking now back at the beginning of the 1960s here. not even what has happened to the agencies today. He was concerned that if it couldn't be repealed and restored to an advisory agency to the president, which is its intent when it was created, he wanted to amend it or abolish it. Let that sink in. This is why we wanted to play you this. You need to understand what we're dealing with today. And what these people who go into Congress, with all good intentions, believing that this Constitution works and people are adhering to it, we're going to wonder who they can trust. Like Homer said, Raskin, the Democrat in this committee, gets a copy of everything he does. And he knows he's sending it right to the White House. The White House is turning around and putting pressure on people, maybe even threatening people. Those are alarming statements, especially when it comes to this and our freedoms. So who's in control? How much influence does China have? They're buying politicians. They're allowing them to buy up land in our country and set up factories that, as we told you, there are people sitting there denying that it has anything, these factories, these companies have anything to do with the Communist Chinese Party. Say they're directly involved with the Communist Chinese military. That's a fact. Now, there's more here. And we're going to leave some parts in about how DJ likes to connect things to the UFO file and the Kennedy assassination. Both relevant, but we're going to focus on the Kennedy assassination here and cover-ups and everything that we may see replay itself now of what the Biden administration is doing with this money from Communist China and how the agencies are covering up. If they've gone rogue, then they're constitutionally illegal. Keep that in mind. This is more from DJ.
Now, one of the things that I've pointed out, which ufology researchers on one hand and deep state researchers on the other have let fall fallow to the ground with no follow-up, but it's crucial, is the testimony of Watergate lawyer Douglas Caddy to me in our interview that his friend, E. Howard Hunt, told him in private, not for public dissemination, but they were very close friends, that Kennedy had been assassinated over the UFO file. Now, again, Caddy had been the Watergate lawyer, is a historical figure, long distinguished career. He put this on the record about E. Howard Hunt. E. Howard Hunt was caught up in the Watergate burglary. He was the top CIA super spy for decades. So this is what he communicated in private. We have a very, very high-level historical figure giving us the information of somebody who would know on the inside. So he has placed it, in fact, on the record that Kennedy wanted to, and this is something I've investigated, go in the background and investigate and share our information of the UFO file with the Russians, with the idea that a nuclear incident could be avoided. Another piece that gets in here is a recent revelation, which comes directly out of the work of Jefferson Morley, who's the person who found us the George Ioannidis connection. He's a former Washington Post reporter who gave them the straight dope about George Ioannidis, the person who had set up this Oswald psychological project back in New Orleans before the assassination and proved that the CIA knew all about Oswald and all the rest. They didn't want any part of it. So Morley went off on his own. He's done it for many years. Now, there's an interesting thing about Morley, and I point this out, which is he tends to have research, and then people pick up on his research, and you see his stuff scattered around in weird tweets and stuff like that, but it's all disembodied. This guy does a lot of deep research. He's not interested in the UFO file or anything like that. but he knows this case about Kennedy and Joanides. And he found something very interesting when he was going through the Watergate tapes that were being released, that a new tape came out that featured former CIA Director Richard Helms talking with Nixon. And on that tape, for the first time, we get a full piece that Nixon's fully aware that the Central Intelligence Agency assassinated President Kennedy, because he says, when it comes to the whole who shot John angle, I know what's going on here. You know, you guys, I need to know from you the details, basically, of how you assassinated him so I can help navigate this situation. It's a remarkable tape, and it is available. I highly recommend everyone listen to it. But the thrust of it is, he says to Helms, look, you need to give me the straight dope on how this was done so I can help to shield the CIA, because I believe in the CIA. Later, the CIA and Helms would participate in helping to remove Nixon through Watergate. So it's a very telling thing when Kennedy says, you know, they're going to be bringing up the whole who shot John angle. And, you know, so he's referring there directly to President Kennedy, and he's implicating the CIA and saying, basically, I want to shield you guys. Tell me how, by giving me the info, sharing that data with the president. This is an important revelation, and there are things that are coming out along the CIA lines. Here's what we have. The Central Intelligence Agency, even, this is a mainstream Politico. Mainstream Politico is a Democrat publication. Yes, the CIA director was part of the JFK assassination cover-up. The only thing that they're missing is "and assassination." So you see the tide of this information is turning these people. They have to figure out how to spin this stuff, and they realize this information's coming out. Maybe also there's a hint inside that the records are going to come out and it's going to be proven. One of the big pieces hanging out there in the middle of it is George Joanides. The articles come out, New York Times, 50 years later, sealed JFK files still raise questions. Joanides was the psychological operations warfare officer for the CIA. He's the one who created the Oswald Project. He's also the one who, when all those things happen in the 1970s, where they want answers like the Pike Commission or the House Commission on Assassination, Select Committee on Assassination, he's the one that's the liaison, even though the rules are we don't want anyone who was active in 1963. The CIA puts this guy forward. Joanides was given the Career Achievement Medal, which is a rare thing for CIA officers to get, because he was the one who was able to swing the entire Oswald operation. And this is basically what he's getting these accolades for. Joanides' records were hidden, and it was only through Morley's efforts at figuring out who this person was, and he mistakenly came upon his identity. As a result of that, we now know that Joanides was responsible and in the heart of the clandestine matter of the CIA developing Oswald. So those records are not even included in the original law in 1992 set up by Congress after the JFK movie came out that says all these records on the Kennedy side need to come out. He's not even included there because they didn't even know that this guy existed. So those records are now part of a lawsuit, and they've been in there. Morley, and at times joined by Professor Scott, has sued the CIA for the records of George Joanides, and they've kicked back sufficiently. At a certain point, they won pretty handily some decisions, and one of the things that they won, the judge who was involved was Judge Kavanaugh, who eventually got elected by President Trump to become the Supreme Court Justice. So let me tell you.
You would say Judge Kavanaugh? Do you remember the hustle and bustle and all the fights that were going on with the Democrats and how they just brought in some crazy lady to accuse him of almost everything? He comes across like he couldn't even imagine he was being accused of these things. provide you with a link to DJ's website because he's got so much more on that. I hope you didn't get lost in the names, but if you listen closely, you would have heard JFK was looking to share what is called the UFO file. Those of you who don't believe in UFOs, there's a thing in Roswell, where they claim they have aliens. It's an Area 51. And it's real. None of it being made out. It's all documented. But he wanted to share with the Russians to avoid maybe a nuclear war. Like if someone was flying over and no one knew what it was. CIA didn't like that. Nixon, he was aware of the JFK assassination. Like he said, they have tapes with Nixon talking. It's documented. It's history. I'll have to go looking for them. You could try to look for them, too, I'm sure, online if they haven't been buried already. We even have Politico, the left-wing newspaper of today. The CIA was part of the plot. And the JFK files have still not been released. Secretary Pompeo, who's then head of the CIA under Trump, strongly urged him not to release them. And something in there even seemed to concern Trump, what he found. Said they'd be too damaging. But damaging to who? This is why I think you're seeing so much pushback on Trump today. They don't want him in there because they're afraid he might be the rest of the files. Because it's pretty obvious now who's behind all these plots. We're seeing it today. Like I said, watch this from the beginning. If you haven't seen the first 4 parts, it all lays it out. Omar and all these people are searching. Jordan, Turner. They're trying to get to the truth. You've got cases in court today, and they're afraid of what's going to come out. I don't know what these cover-ups are, but they even got people that are not even in the JFK file papers that were involved. Now, DJ interviewed these people himself, so he's talking from first-hand knowledge and what he could dig up historically. So he's not making anything up, but this is concerning. The connection to Justice Cavanaugh, that's a shock to many of us. But now we're going to play you. It should tie this all up nicely for you. Roll that.
So let me tell you this. In the need to develop a capacity to know what potential enemies are doing, the United States government has perfected a technological capability that enables us to monitor the messages that go through the air. I know the capacity that is there to make tyranny total in America. And we must see to it that this agency and all agencies that possess this technology operate within the law and under proper supervision so that we never cross over that abyss. That's the abyss from which there is no return.
So there's quite an interesting web going on in relation to this. And what we need to remember is that Kennedy himself, when he was in the Navy, was in naval intelligence. He had the awareness. There's a group report sending him information also about the Roswell crash from 1947. So we know between that and Forrestal that Kennedy had the knowledge of the UFO file going in. This is a crucial piece. Just like with Trump and his uncle, when they go in, they have this knowledge that puts them on the same footing as the deep state, and it's problematic, to say the least. This has to be the calculation of anything going on in the 2024 election. The exotic technology piece, the Kennedy fight against the deep state, has to be figured into the whole piece and what we're looking at, because the other thing on the other angle, which they're laying on this whole, you're going to be stuck with this central bank digital currency, you're going to be under AI, you're going to be in this biometric system. It all relies on the fact that they have been working for 8 decades with this at least 8 decades, with this advanced exotic technology. And we're going to see that they're going to have their own version of disclosure already. One final piece I'll do, since I mentioned Truman and all that. There was a timeline that came up. Yeah, some of this timeline's important. September 18th, National Security Act 1947 establishes the National Security Council and Central Intelligence Agency to replace National Intelligence Authority and Central Intelligence Group. The thing that they put in there still was operational, the Central Intelligence Agency. It is when the OPC merges with it that it becomes the real monster that it is now. Central Intelligence Agency Act of 1949 provides special administrative authorities and responsibilities for the agency and the director. One of the biggest mistakes in the entire history, but it's finally in 59, President Eisenhower presides at the laying of the cornerstone at CIA headquarters in Langley. If you look, you're going to find in 86, when they expanded it, George Bush shows up for the new laying out of this. And of course, George Bush being the CIA director in the 1970s, but also having that thread directly connected further back to the JFK assassination through Zapata and his early association with the CIA. And then Bush's control of the UFO file to the point where when Jimmy Carter asked him, you know, as president, I want the information around the UFO file, he said, you're the president, it's a need to know, and you don't need to know. And Carter fired Bush. So these are the things that are on the record there. That battle, it can be traced through other means. By the time we get to the central core of the Kennedys, one of the important pieces, one of the things that would kind of level things out in society is this knowledge of this extra exotic technology. It's a crucial factor, and it can't be missed. Extraordinary. Well, Bobby Inman is still with us. And after, you know, these incredible stints in government and SAIC and all the rest, he can be put under oath. And they can ask him, why did they give this medal to Joe Annettes? And was it directly related to the fact that he navigated the problem of the JFK assassination cover-up? And finally, on that, two things. One, this is the Jefferson Morley suing the CIA in court for the Joe Annettes records. Let's see how that would show up here. Well, it's getting a lot of glare, but it's easy enough to find, and it's Jefferson Morley versus the CIA. And it's a crucial case. It's had a number of permutations, and you know, he's lost a lot of the cases, but the fact that they're being raised and such distinguished people as Professor Scott have joined the case at times, I think is important. Bobby Kennedy announcing and all these things happening and all these attacks coming in, and Stepford Biden saying, hey, I'm running, I'm going to announce next week, after saying he was going to do it in the fall, was the same week that Kirsten Gillibrand, who I've pointed out a number of times on this program as somebody who has positioned herself with Marco Rubio to create this UFO Defense Office, and they attached it to the National Defense Authorization Act, which is a very kind of unscrupulous and effective thing to do. But that National Defense Authorization Act, of course, secures $1 trillion in military spending. The president has to sign it every year and renew the September 11th emergency that we all live under. As
RFK Jr., huh? Steps into the race, causes a bunch of panic. But let's go back. Let's go back and unfold that. So this was the Senator Church from the Church Committee. The committee that gave birth to the Oversight Committee we are hearing from today. That's why I wanted to replay that. We played that for you many times in our shows because it's important. Because is this the abyss he's talking about? The abyss of no return? Is there a deep state? Is it still just a conspiracy theorist? Do you really believe that there isn't some powers operating that's manipulating your life and affecting our way of government? The advancements in technology Is there some advancements in technology that this deep state, these federal agencies, don't want to share with us, we the people? The Act of 1949, and then the CIA in 1959. He mentions 1986, which is probably a little known fact to people, when George Bush, future vice president, and future president, he doesn't need to know. He codified them. Historic fact. How many people don't know about that? What was going on there? Documents still suing for in court. Sounds just like what James Comer is suing for. How long has it been since they've been suing for these documents? Why is there such a cover-up? Think about this. What's happening to representative government? You know, like our founders envisioned, the whole idea, the government of the people, by the people, for the people. Who is the CIA? Who's in control of it? Many questions to consider right there. So now we're looking at what? Digital currency, where our transactions can be tracked and even controlled, or even halted by the government. We have AI. A lot of questions coming up about that. That's a new hot topic, it seems to be. Then we have the biometric IDs. Again, we have this advanced technology. Now, everybody who's so quick to dismiss the UFOs, don't dismiss what you hear. Because there's so much of what these trials are involved in. It's fact, you can't deny it. Gillibrand and Rubio have opened up an office. So it's not just a conspiracy theory. They've opened up an office as part of the national defense. RFK Jr. running, that seems to cause a lot of panic as to what he may reveal. They're like dismissing him as some kind of crazy guy who's against vaccines. But what is it all about? Trump's knowledge of his uncle passed away. You may have remembered he had to go visit an uncle before, I forget what it was, a rally or something that would happen. He was still president, a press conference, whatever it was, but passed away. Involved in the MIT, was involved with a member of the Bush family. Like I said, you might want to look into some of DJ's videos. He likes to go, that's his niche, his UFO file, connecting that with the JFK assassination, JFK files that we haven't seen yet. There's so much to unwind. The bottom line of why we're showing you all this tonight is because what we're seeing take place now is at the end game. You can go back and watch my Brick series, the end game, where we connect all the controls of digital currency and what's going on with BRICS. And what are they really after? What are they really after? You like your freedom? Would you surrender your freedom for a job that was created by a totalitarian country, their military, operate in our country? He's going to take over a country if we don't stay ahead of them. That's why we played other parts with Ferguson. So we hopefully tonight gave you an awakening to make you stop paying attention. Because, as Jefferson said, to be ignorant and free, a state of civilization, is what never was, never will be. With that, good thing.